In this presentation, I'll be talking about the differences between genuine suicide notes and forged suicide notes. I'll also be discussing why it is so important to be able to distinguish the two. To begin with, why would someone ever want to forge a suicide note? What motives might a person have to need to pretend that they want to kill themselves? Before we look at examples of forged suicide notes, let's first go over the core elements of what a genuine suicide note should contain. Below are some of the points Olson makes about suicide notes. Firstly, a suicide note should contain a preposition, even if it is apparently bizarre or unusual. This proposition is normally to do with the act of suicide itself and/or with the communication, i.e. the suicide note itself. This means that the note must contain the clear objective that the writer intends to kill themselves. Secondly, the preposition should be simply phrased, direct, aimed at the addressee, and be relevant to the writer's relationship with the addressee. Thirdly, when the necessity for suicide is mentioned, the suicide note should be completely clear that this is not only the best course of action, but also the only course of action. A person writing a genuine suicide note would not usually have many doubts at this point. Fourthly, a suicide note is generally quite short, with most of them being less than 300 words in length. A suicidal person would not usually think to include irrelevant or overly dramatic content. Finally, the situational context of the suicide note is not always obvious. Sometimes the reader must deduce the context from the content of the note. With these characteristics established, let's take a look at an example of a classic suicide note. Dearest Mary, this is to say goodbye. I have not told you because I did not want you to worry, but I have been feeling bad for 2 years with my heart. I knew that if I went to a doctor, I would lose my job. I think this is best for all concerned. I am in the car in the garage. Call the police, but please don't come out here. I love you very much, darling. Goodbye, Bill. This note contains only 79 words and seems to check most of the boxes for the points made previously. Firstly, we have a clear proposition for the suicide. I am in the car in the garage. This means to say the writer has already decided and planned on the method of suicide. Similarly, this is to say goodbye conveys a direct proposition with the intended reader. We see no hint of doubt in the writer's language, other than perhaps the doubt that this is the best decision for people other than himself. This is highlighted with, I think this is best for all concerned. Overall, we see a concise note which contains everything we expect to see from a person who is about to attempt suicide. Now let's take a look at a fake suicide note. It's the coward's road, but it suits me. I've sacrificed too much to live as an honourable man. I'd be lying to continue. I've chosen this road myself. No one has forced me to do it. It's all my own doing, and I've no one else to blame. My family, my precious Macy, I love you. I know I've hurt you, but it's the only way I could choose. It's not about you, it's me and my conscience, and it's a struggle I have to end. Charles. In this example, we can see things are very different. Firstly, there's no direct proposition. Everything is quite vague and never directly mentions suicide. Secondly, the note does not even seem directly addressed to anyone. To begin with, the recipient of the note seems to be open, with the writer using non-direct terms. Towards the end, the author mentions my family, my precious Macy, but this doesn't seem coherent with the rest of the text. Everything about this note seems to tell us that it has not come from a mind contemplating suicide. So why might someone fake a suicide note? Well, the most drastic answer would be to escape a conviction. If somebody believed a person had committed suicide, they would not suspect that somebody else may have been behind the death. The forging of documents, whether it be on paper or digital, example mobile phone, has often been a tactic employed by people wishing to escape conviction for a crime. Cases like this are where forensic linguistics can prove invaluable. One of the most famous examples of forensic linguistics debunking a suicide is the Gary Weddell case, often described as the full stop that caught a killer. Sarah Weddell was a mother of three who was popular and well respected in the community. She was a nurse with highly religious beliefs who was known for her kindness to others. At the end of January 2007 in Bedfordshire, Gary Weddell, a police inspector, knocked on his neighbour's door to ask him for help finding his wife Sandra, after telling him she'd gone missing the day before. Soon after, Sandra Weddell was found dead in the garage of the family home. She had apparently died of asphyxia. Sandra was found with a cable tie around her neck and a piece of A4 paper, which was what appeared to be a suicide note. Dear Gary, I've decided to end it all. This first full stop is what first struck Olson as suspicious. It was not consistent with other letters written by Sandra Weddell. Sandra's letters were found to usually be long and to contain commas, dashes, and semicolons, as opposed to Gary's writing, which was usually short and to the point. This, among other suspicious features, caused Olson to believe the text was not genuine. It was established that the letter had in fact been written by her husband, using rubber gloves on the family computer. A year later, on bail, Gary and his mother-in-law were both found dead, caused by gunshot wounds. It was ruled that Gary had killed both his wife and his mother-in-law before killing himself. So what does this case tell us about the authenticity of suicide notes? One thing I believe is extremely important in questioning the genuineness of a text is authorship. To be an author is to possess the language you are using. This was key to the Weddell case. Through looking at texts produced by a person, it is possible to tell if a certain text is something they might typically write. In this way, the alleged suicide note written by Sandra Weddell was determined not to be consistent with her writing style. There are many features which can help define a person's linguistic fingerprint. Firstly, the grammar and punctuation of the text may be important. As mentioned previously, Sandra Weddell often used dashes and semicolons in her writing, a trait that was not found in the alleged suicide note. Secondly, the note and writing itself. For example, was the note handwritten? Was it printed? A printed note could be viewed as suspicious in itself, as it would be the easiest way to evade having to imitate somebody's handwriting. Additionally, if the note was written, what device was used to write it? In the famous John Benet Ramsey ransom note case, this played a key role. The ransom note was said to have been written by a hostile organisation who had kidnapped the businessman's daughter for a ransom sum. However, both the pen and paper used for writing the note were discovered to have come from the house of the man himself. This does not lie as directly in the field of forensic linguistics as the content of the note itself, but it is an important contributing factor nonetheless, and can be invaluable in providing context to how the note was written. Finally, the content of the note is important. There may be words and expressions that only the person themselves use and are almost impossible to imitate. A famous example of this is the Hodgson case, where analysing mobile phone text contributed to a conviction. Forensic linguists showed that text messages sent from Jenny's phone, after the time she went missing, had traits similar to that of David Hodgson, who was later convicted of murder. Texts such as suicide notes, ransom notes, and criminal texts in general all require some of the same questioning in order to determine their genuineness. To sum it up, does the text contain content you would expect from the author, and does the text convey its purpose properly? If both these questions can be answered positively, then the chances are the text is genuine. Suicide notes in particular are a very sensitive issue in crime, as they can lead to a person being treated very differently posthumously, whether this be for burial reasons, insurance reasons, or other personal reasons. This is why it is extremely important to be critical of suicide notes, and why forensic linguistics is such a useful tool in this area. A linguistic fingerprint can be just as telling as a regular fingerprint.